So in this video, I'm going to be going over an early game or fresh save hard mode tier list. So we're going to be ranking everyone based on how good they are on a fresh save. For availability, which is just like when you get certain units, I'll factor that in a little bit. But I'll also talk about like how you unlock certain units and if it's worth it to get certain units over other units. But we're going to mostly be focusing on the core units. We'll hit every unit, but just know that some units are probably going to be New Game Plus, so they're not going to be. They'll still be good, but they won't be usable until halfway through the game, 75% way through the game. So you'll only be able to use them for a few chapters. All right, so let's start out with Benedict. This is on a fresh save, so this is using him from start to finish. I would say overall Benedict's A tier. The main reasons are his damage and defensive buffs are decent early game, and then late game when he gets Dragon Shield, that's really good. Now is pretty good. Twofold Turn is pretty good. There's nothing bad about his kit. He's pretty tanky as a unit, so he's kind of like an off tank as well that can be used to body block to prevent enemies from smacking your squishy units. Frederica, I would say, is A tier. She is pretty good overall from start to finish. You basically just have her spam Fire Breath, or I want to call it Breath of Fire, but I know that's wrong. Her AoE fire attack, her like starter one. And then she has like Burning Chains, which is really good. And she can just nuke things down, and she's like one of the first good offensive mages you get. Roland, I would say, is A tier. He has good damage. A lot of people always say he has like low durability, but on a fresh save, like his durability is actually higher in early game because enemies deal like low damage and then they start to deal more damage as you approach end game. But as you approach end game, he can use Rush and Flash of Steel, and he can be relatively safe. So he's pretty easy to get damage off with, and he has pretty good mobility. Similar to how he's good, I would say he's A tier under normal circumstances. Under a fresh save, he's also, if you know how to use him, he's really good. But that's true of like every character. So like to not know how to use a character but then to rank it low is, I think, a bit misleading. Some people tend to rank him lower than his like actual effectiveness, but just because a unit's skill floor might be a little bit higher doesn't mean that unit's bad. Gila, I would say she's A tier. She can haste things and heal things for 1 TP, and then eventually she can remove all conditions, like about mid-game. This is really good for a first playthrough where money and economy is an issue. So I would say she's A tier. Anna, I would say she's A tier. I mean, some people might put her at S, but she honestly doesn't deal like an insane amount of damage to justify putting her at S. And the main thing she does early game is poison does 10% of an enemy's max HP, and then it caps out at 30. So once enemies hit like 300, 400, and then 500 HP, her poison starts to deal less damage percentage-wise. But when it deals 10%, she can throw poison on 2 targets, and that does matter. So I'd say she's A tier. This is what I put her at for New Game Plus, but I would say she's like always just like A tier. Some people might say she's S tier early game, but honestly, I think they just don't know how to use like Roland very optimally. So they like, by comparison, because these are like the 2 first damage dealers you get, they think that she's like way better than him. But when you actually know how to use Roland correctly, like it kind of puts Anna into perspective. Like they're both like A tier damage. She's like single target, he's AoE. Then we have Eridor. I would say Eridor is A tier. He has pretty good tanking early game. Mages are a problem for him. His provoke is still good, like throughout the entirety of the game. The main things he wants to do are provoke as many enemies as humanly possible, get tank on him from Benedict. I would say he's really good throughout like the entire game. He can deal chip damage, but he mostly just wants to be spamming provoke and just like wasting enemy turns. And another cool thing you can do with him is provoke and then move. And if you move past like a wall of your allies, the enemies that are furied will try to get to Eridor, and if they physically can't, they'll waste turns. So pretty huge strategy early on. Most of these starting units are really good. I wouldn't say any of them are like broken or like extremely good. Well, actually, that's not true because one is. Huey, I would say starts off at S tier. Every turn she can blind something. It lasts 3 turns starting out. Blind early game is extremely powerful and shuts like most things down. and their miss rate is like 80 to 90%. So they like have a 10 to 20% chance to hit on average. She can grab high ground for free. She gets damage boost and range increase from high ground. There are maps she can solo. Once she gets shadow stitching arrow, she can pin enemies in place, allowing your team to have fewer threats approaching your group. So she can like pin enemy mages, enemy healers, enemy damage dealers from high ground, and then they just can't advance with their team, and they just waste 2 turns. So she has some of the best shutdown early game, along with Eridor. But her high ground, her ability to solo maps, her tanking from just being high up, and her ability to shut down multiple things while damaging them is extremely powerful, especially early game. So I'd say she's our first S tier on a fresh save. Corinton, he's just A tier early game. He becomes S tier once he gets Icy Coffin, Glacial Moon, and what's the other ability? Ice Shield, I believe. The one that gives you 1 hit of invincibility. So early game, he has Frosty Fetters, Icy Breath, and Ice Wall, and all of these are 2 TP, and he can use these all right away. So these are really good abilities that allow you to deal, single target damage, spike, and silence, to put Ice Wall up and either delay enemy turns or waste enemy turns, or just allow your team to reposition. And then for Icy Breath, it's just good damage and puts ice tiles on the ground. So like he has a good mix of control and damage right out of the gate. And early game, 2 TP is cheap, especially with a battery, and you do get a battery, and I'm going to get into that soon. And he can just spam 1 of 3 really strong options, and then once you get end game, he becomes S tier. But until then, he's just A. But he's like bordering. I would say he's like here. He's like A plus. So the order they're in is not like who's better with an A tier, but I would say he's like almost S tier. But like once you hit end game, he gets Glacial Moon, that's when he becomes S tier. Rudolph, I would say, is A. Traps are really good. One of the best tools for shutting down bosses. Really good for defensive, like enemy turn wasting. He has Slumber Shot, which is good. He has Armor Ignoring. Oh no, he doesn't. He has I'm thinking of Archibald. He has like a single target spike that does good damage. He just has good damage and good shutdown. He's just a strong unit. Him and Corinton are like both damage dealer shutdowns in a way. So you get one or the other depending on what route you take pretty early on. So they're both good. Serenoa, A tier. You start off with Delaying Strike. That's good. Hawk Dive gets unlocked pretty quickly. Allows him to single target spike. And then we have Shielding Stance, which gets unlocked pretty soon. And then that Sweeping Attack. So he gets single target delay, single target spike, and then he gets AoE damage, and then he gets Shielding Stance pretty early on. So I would say he's a good like bruiser utility. And then once he gets under Conviction's banner, he becomes like almost like an S tier unit. Or even I would even say he probably does become an S tier unit. One thing I am noticing is how similar these like their faces are. Huey and Serenoa. All right, but I would say he's A tier until late game. Julio, honestly, is S tier early game. He's the first. He will be the first battery you get. You get Medina around the same time, but he can battery before she can. She needs to be like level 20 or something before she can even TP Physic. You can unlock his Moment of Truth cost -1 very fast, like by like chapter 4 or no, like chapter 5 or 6. And then he can use Moment of Truth for 1 TP, which gives another unit 1 TP and magic and strength boost. So he can damage boost all of your damage dealers, especially mages, and battery every single turn very early on in the game. This alone puts him at S tier, but he also has decent damage and contribute to follow-up attack spam. He can remove TP from enemies, and he can contribute to tanking and damage. Once he gets TP barrier, he can get a flat 25% damage reduction against all sources. It's 5% per TP, so that's late game, but early game, like on a fresh save, he's a free battery that damage boosts, and he's also tanky, and he also deals damage and removes TP from enemies. So this is extremely strong. He can battery a Frederica or Corinton every turn, and then they can just keep spamming spells. And then once he gets finished them, he can pay 3 TP to transfer 2. So then he can like finish them to like one of these and then start battering the other one. And he also gets 1 TP back per kill pretty early on. So whenever he last hits an enemy, he gets 1 TP back. Hasabara, early game. Um, I don't really know. I actually might put her higher. I'll actually put her at B tier because she has like a decent heal early game, but it really falls off late game, and her damage is okay early game, so I'd say she's B tier. She doesn't get catapult yet, but she just kind of runs around and smacks things and heals. Um, and she gets trekking for TP early, and she gets desperate defenses kind of early. So she's okay. She's not as bad as she is late game. Late game, like all these units really pop off, and she just kind of her main thing is catapult, which is basically just like one of Quahog's abilities that isn't a weapon skill. So I would say she's B tier. Narv, I would say early game Narv is actually A tier. He just has good damage. He's just a decent unit. You can battery him. You can use him, Corinton, or Frederica. Um, they're all about like the same early game. Late game is when they start to become different because like once you get Sunfall and Glacial Moon, these two kind of stay A tier. Well, he becomes S tier, and then he becomes like I would say B, but he's good early game and on a fresh save. Jens I would say is A tier. I don't have him at S because it takes him like halfway through to unlock trap cost -1, and he's also vulnerable to magic. So he's kind of like he needs like babysat to some degree. Like you have to prevent enemy mages from being able to hit him, which is a little annoying. But when his traps are 2 TP, he's not as good. So that's why I kind of average him to A tier. Now obviously once he gets trap cost -1, he becomes like S tier because he can shut down bosses. And then like ladder strats are really good, but like on a fresh save, I would say he's not as good because your team is missing like King Shield, Glacial Moon. It's missing like huge things that boost your overall effectiveness, and he really suffers from that. Like when his traps are 2 TP, he's like B tier, and then once his traps are 1 TP, he's S. So I kind of average him at A, if that makes sense. Lionel, I would say he's A tier. Just Fury at range, like early game. Fury at range and just being behind allies, so you Fury like an enemy, you can Fury like anything, and as long as it's not an archer, like your allies are in the way, it just literally shuts things down and wastes their turns. He can also Fury enemy mages. He can Fury enemy healers at range. This is extremely useful on a new game. Pretty high proc rate of 80%, and then it like gets to 90, and then eventually 100, and then once he gets endless speech, he has really reliable shutdown at range. So he's a really good unit. He has no damage, but he's a shutdown unit. So Piccoletta, I would say, is A tier. Decoys are really good early on. They're also good on like New Game Plus. The enemies tend to target them and waste turns, but you can also spam stones. On a fresh save, spamming stones, like she can still spam cheaper stones, and she can also whack enemies for decent damage early game. Late game, it starts to fall off, but early game, it's okay to do this. But you can spam 200 gold coin stones, and she does decent damage. She's pretty good. Just decoy spam is good because it just wastes enemy turns and contributes to shutdown. Medina, I would say, is B tier overall on a fresh save. She's only S tier once she can TP Physic for the entire game. She can only TP Physic for like, I want to say 60, like starting at 60% to 70% mark. She just really falls off. Well, she doesn't fall off. She starts off just as kind of like an expensive healer that's basically just worse than Gila. The double items heal is nice, but you have to pay for it, and it depends on how much you want to grind. But even outside of that, she needs 3 TP to double items, and without TP Physics, she can't do her normal thing of spamming AoEs and get hit by her own AoEs to TP Physic herself. So she has TP issues early on. She can still be a decent healer though, so that's why I put her at B. And then once she gets TP Physics, she easily becomes S tier. But then for your first save, you're upgrading everyone. Like honestly, it took me like 2 to 3 playthroughs to upgrade like half of my team fully, and that's with some grinding too. So running Medina can be very unappealing on a first playthrough, especially if you don't want to grind a ton. So I would say for these reasons, and also you don't get TP Physic until you're at least halfway through the game or further. So like for half the game, she's just not even nearly as good as she usually is. For like half the game, she's basically just a worse Gila. And then once she gets TP Physic, then she's S tier, but I can't rate a unit as S tier that's only S tier for like 5 missions. I don't think that's reasonable because it's misleading because you'll use her and be like, what the hell? She's just kind of like she's like Gila, but she costs you money. So like on a fresh save when you're saving for upgrades, buying all these materials, it's very annoying to run her. I guess for that reason I can probably bump Piccoletta down, but she can still whack things and ball toss and make decoys. And even if she just makes decoys and whacks things, I'd say she's still A tier because she actually was my main tank on my first hard playthrough. I didn't even use Eridor at all on my very first hard playthrough. I used him like for a few missions early on and then stopped. But she can hold down, she can tank surprisingly well with evasion plus her decoy. So I would say she's still A just for those reasons. Azana, I would say she's A tier. Basically, all you want to do with her is you just want to spam lightning. It has like a 50 to 60% chance to paralyze, does good single target spike. With Julio battering her, that's good damage shutdown combo every single spell, every single turn. You just keep shooting lightning bolts, paralyzing things, disabling things while damaging them. Knocking enemies out of turn for 2 turns is huge, especially on a fresh save when we have like minimal shutdown options. So still A tier overall. Just that's all you do with her. She just spams lightning strike. Archibald, I'm not so sure about him. Honestly, I'm going to put him at B tier on a fresh save. The reason for this is Inescapable Arrow is really good, but you don't have the battery to support it. And him unupgraded, he has horrible movement. He has like 3 move. He needs a move upgrade, and it's either tier 2 or tier 3 where you get it. So you have to like waste money just to get him to move. He's basically like really bad until he's fully upgraded and you have battery. Without battery, he burns through TP really fast and then just can't do anything. And then his 3 move is such a liability. He's annoying to run. You don't have Quahog, you don't have Hasabara like catapult, so you can't really throw him to high ground reliably. The only thing you could really do is light wave him to high ground, which would be fine. But Huey can just take it for free. So now you're just running a worse archer in this case, and he doesn't have shutdown. But on a new game plus with Medina fully upgraded, he's definitely A tier. But without battery, he falls off hard. And with his poor mobility on a fresh save, not fun. Cordelia. All right, so these 3 units are Chapter 15 unlocks. So you get one of these. These 4 units. You get one of these 4. So we're going to rate them from Chapter 15 until endgame. So we're not going to it doesn't make sense to say, oh well, Milo sucks because she's not available type of thing. It's like, how good is she from when you get her until when the game ends? So that's how we're going to be rating these. And then also another thing is like, as you do New Game Plus, availability doesn't matter. This game isn't Fire Emblem, so on and so forth. Milo, I would say, is A tier. Good evasion, decent damage. Tempt is good. Once she gets Power of Love, she's really insane. But she also can AoE stun or AoE paralyze with a 60% proc rate, which can be good. Moon Jump lets her jump in, run away, jump to high ground. She has 10 move effectively. Just a really good unit overall. I don't have her at S tier because you don't get all of her good things right away. Like, you don't get Power of Love until like near the very end. Otherwise, I'd put her at S tier. So I think this is fair for now. Because you get her Chapter 15, which you could argue the availability thing, but in this case, we're not going to. Cordelia, I would say, is A tier. She gets 1 TP for just standing still and has better spike healing than Gila. She doesn't have condition removal, but she has huge AoE heal, like the best AoE heal in the game, aside from Medina's board heal, which only heals for 100, so it's a little overhyped anyways. But she has a good 5-person heal, and she has really good healing range, and she just gains TP. So she can spike heal every turn, and she can also AoE spike heal. So she's pretty good. She's about as good as Gila. Trish, on a fresh save, and considering you have to unlock one of these 4, I would say C tier. I would say do not go for Trish on your first save. She has stealing mechanics that can get you free items, but the items are usually like spices and enchanting spices and just like random things like this. It's not like huge value. For farming, Lionel's better because when he picks up spoils, he gets you money, so he's the best unit for farming. Trish is all about spoils and stealing, so like for farming, she's not really that good. And as a unit, she's like decent, but I'd say she's an overall B tier unit. But on a fresh save, especially when you're choosing between these 4, she's probably the worst. Travis, I would say, is B tier. He's like the in terms of who you should unlock, I would say get one of these two for your first save or your first playthrough, and then probably Travis if you want him. He has 3-tile delay, which is pretty good. He also has backward toss, which deals good single target. He can get it for 1 TP. It usually costs 2, but he can get it reduced to 1. It does good single target spike, and he has delay. And then he has a big AoE attack that needs a charge, but he doesn't get that until late game. It's decent. There's really not too much to say about him. He's like a decent unit, but he's not like... Honestly, the starting roster is way better. All right, some of these units... Let's reorganize these a little bit. Let's do like this. All right. So some of these units are easier to unlock than others. Most of these. So some people will get some of these on their first playthrough. Some will not. These can be hard to get. I did not get Maxwell. I got Flanagan on my first playthrough, but not Maxwell. Some people have the opposite. So depending on either if you min-max your convictions and unlock certain convictions to get certain units, you will get some of these, aside from Avlora, who's a golden route unit. You do the golden route, you get her chapter 17. You will get some of these, or maybe none of these, potentially. So we're just going to assume you get these probably around like the 60 to 80% mark, like with or without min-maxing to unlock them. That's probably around when you'd get them, even with like focusing on certain dialogue options and everything. So we'll start with Maxwell. Maxwell early on is S tier for a fresh save, because he has revive and enemies don't deal that much damage until New Game Plus anyways. That's when they start to 2 and 3 shot everything. But before that, revive and his durability makes him an S tier unit. But then as you hit New Game Plus, he rotates down to A. Same thing with Julio. But yeah, I would say he's S tier on a fresh save because he just has revive for free, and that's really powerful before you start getting crazy abilities that change the game completely. Flanagan, I would say, is probably B tier early on. He becomes almost S tier. He's easily an A tier. Honestly, he might be an S tier support late game. Ramparts is so good, it lets you completely make your entire back line tanky. So, like, he's not even just like a personal tank. He can make an entire back line, like 4 other units on your team, completely tanky, so that if enemies get to them, you don't even have to worry because they take half damage for 3 turns. So he's B tier before he gets that, but honestly, I think he should be S tier after he gets that, the more I've been using him. And it's not even just Death Ball. Team Comp, which is a team comp where you run Flanagan, Serenoa, Corentin, Medina, and Avlora, and that's all you run. And he just makes everyone tanky. Him and Serenoa put shielding stance on squishies, Medina batteries, Corentin glacial moon nukes. Everyone takes half for quarter damage between Serenoa and Flanagan. And then Avlora has low unit count, stat increase, and can just run around killing things. So, alright, so on a fresh save, Avlora, she is a level, or chapter 17 unlock on Golden Route. I would say she's A tier. You can't really take too much advantage of her gimmicks without some of these weapon skills. Like, you need Ramparts, you need like Gila Res or TP Physic. Like, you need a lot in order to make her S tier. If you just run her by herself, you might be able to beat some maps. I don't know, I haven't really experimented with it, so it's possible. But you only get her chapter 17, so even if you were to have her solo maps, it would only be a handful of maps. So I would say the highest she could be on a fresh save is A tier. Grama on a fresh save. Oh, I don't even know, dude. She's like, what does she have? She's like evasion. She has low damage. Honestly, she feels like very C tier on a fresh save. I would say she like starts to pop off once she gets all of her abilities. But on a fresh save, I couldn't really see her being any good. Same thing with like Giovanna. Because she needs Gelid Barrage, and that's like one of her last unlocks. So she would get that for a few maps. And even so, she needs battery and Corentin spam, or like ice spam, to really just continue to use things. Ivy Beam is good, but you need grass, and like a lot of maps don't have grass, which is annoying. So if she's on a map where she can Ivy Beam, she's like B, but otherwise I would say she's C. Same thing with Decimal. Honestly, Decimal is going to be D tier on a fresh save, because you don't have the battery to get him spamming spells, and he's like a B tier unit anyways, because he has inconsistent damage, and you can't target specific things. Now, there are maps where his height +5 can be spammed with a battery, but with low battery, because like first of all, he's going to be getting unlocked late, and with Julio as your only battery, this dude doesn't generate TP on his own, so he's very costly to run. And without TP physics spam, from Medina, he really falls off and is just like straight up garbage until you get like once you get TP physics spam. I would say he's like BA depending on the map, so like average B plus. But without it, he's way too annoying to run. You could argue just wait with him and then nuke. Sure, you could do that, but I would argue that he would be better off being like any other mage, like legitimately like any of these other mages, because they at least generate TP on their own for turn. Like he doesn't have to completely waste a turn to get 3 TP back, which is a huge opportunity cost of running him. Plus the damage is random, so you truly have no idea what's going to happen when he even can act, because by the time he can cast his spell, all the enemy's health values, they're getting healed, they're taking damage. You have no idea. It's way too random. On New Game Plus, I would say he's a B or A tier depending on the map, but on a fresh save, he's very bad. Quahog, honestly, Quahog isn't overpowered early on. He becomes overpowered later on, but he's just a solid A tier otherwise. He essentially has one of the best heals in the game. It's a complete reset. So you can send, like if you calculate the damage correctly, you could send like a Roland or a Maxwell or whoever, like some melee unit into like straight up danger. And as long as they don't take lethal damage and they're at like 10% health after like maybe killing something or dealing some damage with like rush or triple thrust or whatever, high jump, name a thing, he can completely reset them to full health and their position. So for 2 TP and he has teleport, that's at minimum A tier. He doesn't get broken stuff until you get weapon skills, until he gets his weapon skill, and then Julio gets Inheritor, and then you can break the game easily. But before then, he's just a very solid unit. He isn't as good as a normal healer under normal circumstances until he can break the game, because if you miss a turn, like if he just heals something and like 3 of your units were like taken damage, he can't actually heal them once a turn has passed for him. He only can reset them back a turn between his turns. So he really can't heal things that take damage. He can only reset them, and once that time window ends, he can't heal unless he uses like a pellet or something. So, but he still has teleport. He can switch places with things. He still has a decent damage skill, and he can still stop time, and he can start to do his combos near the end game, like in the last like 2 or 3 chapters, which is when he becomes S tier. But until then, he's just a solid A tier. So this is my early game tier list. Luckily, most of the characters honestly are really good, and then there's only like few S tiers, and then like there's like a few Bs, and then most of the characters that are bad are like either intentional unlock or hard to unlock anyways. So that's not bad at all. But yeah, definitely let me know what you think. If you have an argument as to why one of these should move up or down, I'd like to hear it, especially if it's a really reasonable argument that's provable. So, like, I don't really care. Like, you can post opinions too, that's fine. But if you're trying to argue that I'm wrong about something, if you have provable evidence, I'm all for it. The scientific method, hooray. But yeah, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed this, definitely like and subscribe. And that's all for now. See ya.